really happy to have Renana Ben here with Lakshmi. I'm especially happy because through the day, yesterday and today, there has been a lot of conversation on role of women in rural development and in various topics, in various contexts. And who better to have here than Renana Ben herself. She is the national coordinator of Seva. She Padma Shri awardee. She has worked with women and grassroots movements across India. She's a social worker based in Ahmedabad who's been active for decades in organizing women into organizations and trade unions, and has extensively has been involved in policy issues relating to poor women in the informal economy. I had the privilege of visiting Seva a few years ago and seeing their work for myself. The lessons that I learned during those days still sort of add value to me in my work. We also have Lakshmi with us to chair the session, moderate the session with Renana Ben. Lakshmi works at NCORE. She's a director of new initiatives, and she helps incubate early stage nonprofits in the area of poverty alleviation, and is handling a very interesting program right now where she's working with the waste picker communities in Karnataka, with a lot of really dedicated nonprofits and leaders. I will leave it to Lakshmi to take this conversation forward with Renana.
Thanks, John. Renana Ben, welcome to Charcha 2020. It's our pleasure to have you here with us. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I know John introduced you and spoke about the work that you've done, but when I was reading up about Seva and I got to know that I would be spending time with you, I came across an interesting fact and I was very curious. Your educational degrees are in maths and in economics, and that too in really prestigious universities. How did you, what was your motivation to join the social service space, and how did you end up joining Seva?
Well, first, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Naj, for this opportunity to be part of this chat. And I look forward to talking to you, Lakshmi. How did I start? How did I join Seva? Of course, it was so many years ago that one hardly remembers. But I did do my mathematics from Delhi University, then Harvard University, and then I changed to Yale University to do economics. But I came back, the time nowadays people go abroad, they come back, they go back. But those days you could hardly come back. So after 3 years, I had come back, and I realized that when you go abroad, you really see the difference and see the poverty. And that time it was, of course, much more visible. And I suddenly started feeling very bad in a way. I said that, here I'm getting so much expensive education, and there are so many people, so much injustice, so much inequality. And what am I doing about it? And so I actually was doing a PhD at Yale, and I decided to come for a year and try something. And parents wanted to go to women's organization. I already worked in the women's movement at the time. And my parents found out for me about Seva. And I was actually interested also in rights. So they found out for me about Seva, and I came to Seva, and then I never finished my PhD and I never went back. So. You're muted, Lakshmi.
Yes, and it was as simple as that for you. And I wish the choice is as easy for many others that want to follow in the path. But as a follow-up question, when you joined Seva, it started off very early as probably a labor union for women in the informal space, but it's grown so much bigger and so much more. So for the benefit of the people that are in the conference and many others that are watching it on other channels, How would you describe Seva today, and what is its guiding philosophy?
Sure, let me try. Well, Seva stands for Self-Employed Women's Association. Now, that's the English name, and Seva has its own connotation. But the actual name is Swashray Mahila Seva Sangh. Swashray means by her own labor or by her own work. Swashray Mahila, Mahila as women. Seva means it's not just for myself, it's not just for the individual, but to serve others. And Sangh is Sangathan, which is coming together. So, so that's the real name of Seva. As you rightly said, Seva was started by Ila Bhatt in Gujarat, in the urban sector for street vendors, home-based workers, head loaders, and it started as a trade union. But within a few years, the trade union itself was invited to go to the rural areas and work with agriculture workers. In all these sectors, the main work of the trade union was for rights. So for space for street vendors, better rates for home-based workers, for agricultural laborers, the minimum wages had been declared. So there was the issue of getting a minimum wage. But what we soon realized was that for these people who are the poorest, the most vulnerable, just a trade union and rights is not enough. You often lose your struggle. The struggle is very long and very many years. So, and they also need development. They need something to support them. And so the first thing that we had started was that street vendors had been taking loans at very high interest rates. So we started our own bank. That was the first developmental work that we did. And after the bank, we started a number of cooperatives so that they could link to the market. So for example, in the Gujarat rural areas, there were a lot of women who were doing agriculture labor, but who were actually weavers and who even had looms, but they had put away their looms. So we formed their cooperative, linked them to the market. So very soon we realized that it has to be both development and rights. And we started in Gujarat, but again, within about 6 years, we were invited to come to other states. And that way we have spread to many other states. We are in 14 states now. And we formed a federation, Seva Bharat, which brings all the Sevas, all the states together. So actually, Seva is now a movement and a family of organizations, I would say. So the trade union is basic. We have about 17 lakh members. We have sponsored many what we call social enterprises. The bank was the first, the cooperatives. From cooperatives, we also had ST federations. We've started companies. And we have about 150 of these, what we call social collective enterprises. But we also have societies and trusts which provide services like housing, like training, like healthcare. So that whole family of organizations, many of which is very decentralized in the states, is what Seva is now. You asked about the philosophy. Let me try, because we haven't really done vision, mission statement type of thing. So what is our goal? Our goal is, we're focused on the economic, of course. So our goal is what we call full employment and self-reliance. Full employment means income security and social security, which again, you can break up, income security, employment, assets. Social security is health, childcare, housing, and so on. And self-reliance is self-reliance of the woman herself, our member, our informal sector worker, who can be rural or urban, self-reliance of her organization, and self-reliance within the community. So I think that's really our goal. We always, in Seva, it's the woman from the informal sector at the center. Everything, she is the one who drives the organization. She is the owner of the organization, of every organization that we form. And by owner means that she holds the share, she's on the board, she makes the decisions, and she is also the beneficiary. How do we do it? We believe in the Gandhian principles and we try to adhere to them, the principle of nonviolence, of Swaraj, what we call self-reliance, of equality of castes, of communal harmony, that is different religions where there is so much division nowadays, and of leadership by women. And those Gandhian principles is how we walk the line. And finally, what I described earlier, the method is the joint action of struggle on the one hand, rights, and development on the other. So I think I don't know if it's a philosophy, but I've tried to describe the path along which we walk.
What is philosophy if not something that guides us in the way we walk every day? And I think you've beautifully illustrated what every day at Seva would mean and what you're guided by as you take every decision. So perfectly answers my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But Seva at the heart of it is, I mean, there is different ways to call this, and you know, experts differ in how they term it. But in a way, as a layperson, I would call it, this is about empowering women to be self-reliant, to be both financially, otherwise, to have a voice at the table in the community. And different organizations have taken different approaches to achieve this. But in your experience, what has been some of the biggest levers to achieve for women to become more empowered? And what is Seva taught you in this?
Sure, I understand. But before I get to that, let me just say what we feel is empowerment, because it has to be at so many different levels. And the different levels are, it has to be internally in her mind first. Or not first, it has to be internally, because all the levels are interconnected. So it has to be in her mind. Women are often very afraid. They're afraid for their bodies. They're afraid because they're brought up to regard themselves as subordinate. And it's when she feels free in her mind, feels she has choices. That's one level of empowerment. The second, of course, which everybody knows, is within the family, where if she has a say in the family. But that's not enough, because she's also a public, you know, just as men are in the community, the market, and interact with the government or with the system of governance. So her empowerment should also be within the community. Does she have a voice in the panchayat, or at least when there are village meetings, can she voice her concern? In the market, can she get a better price? Can she negotiate for a better price for her milk or her crops? Can she negotiate for a loan outside of money lenders and high rate interest rates? And then the whole system of governance. When the PHC is not working, can she approach the health department? Can she approach the BDO for access to government schemes? So I think and each of these is interconnected. As she becomes well-known, or as she gets the courage to talk, say, to the BDO, her status in the family goes up automatically. This woman, you know, my wife actually went and talked to the BDO. So all these levels of empowerment are connected. I wouldn't say one is more than the other. One is more important than the other. And similarly, you can't just have one lever. Oh yes, I should just say, I think our experience shows that empowerment, the sort of prerequisite for empowerment is for people to come together. As one woman alone, it's very difficult to get empowered. Some do, but very rare. But when they come together, they can support each other, they can have a voice, and that's actually a prerequisite. And not one lever, I don't think, but our experience, again, especially because these are poorer families, is that economic benefits, economic empowerment actually can give the biggest push. of course, that alone is not enough. You can bring more money into the family, you can bring income in family and still not have a say. So there is a requirement for social empowerment, but still that's a big push, economic empowerment.
Sure. Renana, just a question. I mean, over Seva's journey in the last 40 years, to get to this state, I mean, you would have tried different things and would love to learn from some of the successes that Seva has had in its various communities. Sure. I personally believe sometimes failures teach us the most valuable lessons. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, would love to hear both those stories.
Sure. You know, this kind of work is really, what would I say, 1.5 steps forward and 1 step backwards. So failure, or I don't like to call it failure really, because there's no such thing as success or failure. You just you have a path, you keep moving along it. And as I said, you get pushed back, then you move further or take a different path. So I don't see things as success or failure. I see things as what are the ways in which one can move forward, and what lessons do you learn when something does not work out. Maybe I'll give you a few examples. I give you 2 examples. One is from Gujarat, from one of the very dry areas in Gujarat, where when we went there, women said what we really need is income and employment. And they were doing very beautiful embroidery for their home consumption, for their dowries actually. And so we converted those beautiful embroideries into modern day products. And these women then started earning a living, and more orders were coming to them. But then what happened was that they were so busy doing the embroidery that they would not, or the men were feeling that they were not taking care of the household. And it came to a head because there was a big meeting of the men, I mean, the community, but it was the men, where women were supposed to cook and men were supposed to deliberate. And they found that the women were not cooking for them because there were some very urgent orders. And so the men got very angry, and they said, you know, the elders of the men, and they said that women are losing their space. And so they should now stop all this work, or if they want to do the work, they can't go anywhere and deliver the work. They just have to stay home. And they forced this notification on the community. And the women, since they had started this work and it was important to them, they came together and they started lobbying. And they talked to the younger men and their husbands and the elders and said that this is something that is useful. And they got the whole thing changed. And then the community, in fact, the elders after a while began really appreciating that that these women are very important resource for the community. And it doesn't matter if they don't cook when we have our deliberations. So, you know, that sort of changed the community norms where women were supposed to stay home and just do the cooking. Another example I'd like to give is from Bihar, actually. And these are women who are sharecroppers. And they, you know, they were very poorly paid, poorly exploited. What I mean is their incomes were very less. And one of the reasons was because they, as women and as sharecroppers, they were unable to get any benefit, any inputs, no seeds from the government, no fertilizer, none of the government benefits. And then they came together, they formed their own groups. And once they formed their own groups, and then they formed a farmer-producer company. And once they formed that, they suddenly got highlighted in the government. And they would go to the government offices and say, we want seeds, we have this group. And then they began being recognized as farmers and began, as I was saying, empowerment with governance and empowerment in the market. So, you know, these are just a few examples. I could just keep going on and on. Let me give you one thing that we're really struggling with, which is many years ago, about 15 years ago, we found that women in Gujarat were doing milk production, but it was they were the ones who milked the cow, who fed the cow, who looked after the cow, everything, or the buffalo. But it was the men who became the members of the cooperative who sold the milk and got the money. So we helped to organize the women and formed women's cooperatives, and they linked up with the market. And it was doing very well. But 15 years later, what do we find? That many of those cooperatives, women's cooperatives, are in a way defunct. Either they've closed down or men have taken over. And I think the biggest lesson from that is that we did not look at the intergeneration issue. So the older women were very empowered, but young women were not. And so I think the lesson is that you really have to continuously organize, continuously give the same messages and look at empowerment from generation to generation. So now we are struggling what to do with these cooperatives.
Sure. No, and I think, I guess, if I may just kind of say this again, I think what we are saying is that even if we have empowered a set of women, it is about changing the whole community, and so that it becomes more sustainable and the next generation doesn't go back, even though you have worked deeply with a particular generation of women, just to ensure that it gets embedded in the community. Renana ji, you said, you know, if you look at empowerment, you kind of see this as starting with the woman at the center and then her family in the community. But I think, you know, it's commonly acknowledged that an empowered woman can literally vitalize the whole community that she lives in. A whole group of women can do so much more. There is a multiplier effect to that collective of women. And have you seen examples of, you've briefly touched upon it in response to the previous question as well, but could you elaborate a little bit more about how it went back and lifted the whole community and changed things for the better in a sustainable way?
Yes, I fully agree that women's empowerment does change the community. And as I said, you know, as women participate more in the community, participate in the market, participate with governance, it will change the community, and the community also gets energized. Again, if I could give you some examples, I was, let's see, which one shall I give? I have so many examples. So let me take, again, from Gujarat, in this district of Baroda district, there's a area called Bodeli, which is a taluka, what do you call it, district. And we were working nearby, or we already were there nearby, and we found that there were some villages which were inhabited by tribal people, and they were extremely poor. What we discovered was that they had been ousted from their original places because a dam had been constructed, and they had been given this unproductive, unirrigated land, even without drinking water. And they came to us and they said, we were already working there. They said, can you work with us and help us? And so we helped women to form their own groups. The first thing that they did, that what they needed desperately, was water, drinking water, first and foremost. And they formed their groups, and what we helped them to find out that there was quite a lot of tribal funds sitting in the government. And they began accessing these funds, and first they got drinking water. From the drinking water, they then went in for irrigation. And that's when they started involving the men also. When irrigation came, they started farming. and the families started getting better and better off. Then they brought in livestock. Some women started artisanal activities, and today they have a vibrant community only because they were able to form that women's group and start accessing the tribal funds which were supposed to be for them, which they couldn't do before. So it's the women's group which gave a voice to the community. The other example is from Madhya Pradesh, which is forest areas. In the forest areas, again, when we first went in, the families were living on forest land, so-called forest land, were doing agriculture there and were doing minor forest produce. Since the land was unirrigated, they would go away during the dry season and have to go for construction labor out of their communities. And they were also very badly exploited by the forest guards. So who would, and there was often beatings. One man even got shot, we remember. So again, we helped to organize the women, and we organized them actually starting with minor forest produce, with tendu leaves. And they organized with tendu leaves. They went to the government, again, since it was owned by the forest department. And they said, we want better rates for these tendu leaves. We want a fair distribution. And they formed their own cooperatives. And slowly, over about 3 or 4 years, or maybe more, the government recognized the importance of giving good rates for tendu leaves, and the rates slowly began going up. Today, they're actually quite good rates. So that was the first thing. The second thing they said was that we are living on this forest land. We have been doing agriculture. And the land, there was the new Forest Act, if you remember. So they began putting their claims for the forest land. And they organized the whole community. The women took the lead, organized the whole community, and they began getting the forest land. And then they started doing agriculture without any fear. And the third thing they did was they brought Narega to these areas. And today, again, they no longer have to go out for labor. They live on their own lands, and the whole community, of course, is part of this. So, organizing the women, bringing their voice in, really revitalizes the whole community.
Thank you so much. I mean, those are great examples of just women taking the lead and making a difference for the whole community, for a village. So thank you so much. Renana ji, I just want to switch tracks a little bit and pick on a topic that has come up multiple times during this conference and in different forums. We've repeatedly talked about the implications of the COVID crisis on marginalized communities, on the most vulnerable sections of community. And one of the points that has come across very strongly in many instances over the last 2 days is that women are bearing a disproportionate share of the burden in light of this crisis. And what are your thoughts on this, and where do we go from there? What can we do?
I would like to just put our experience on what we are seeing. And there's so much emphasis, and we see and such misery of the migrants. But think of who the migrants have left in the villages, and they're all the women. And many of those women are agricultural laborers, construction workers, weavers, other artisanal work. And their incomes from the migrants, of course, have stopped, but then so has their own income, the work that they were doing, say as a weaver or as an agricultural laborer. Her work has stopped. And so these women left behind by the migrants are facing really starvation in many places. If you look at what is happening with the rural farmers, the women farmers, we found that though the Rabi crop did get harvested, they're finding it very difficult to sell. And women more than men, these women farmers, especially those whose men are the migrants, they are finding it, they are not able to go to the market. The traders are not coming. Many of the APMCs are shut. So they are not able to sell their crops. So there is a very acute shortage of cash. And because there's a acute shortage of cash, now they want to get inputs for the next crop, for the Kharif crop. They are unable to buy the seeds. And even if they had the money, it's very difficult for them to actually go out and get the seeds because they rely on public transport. They don't have their own transport, unlike men who do. Then women look after livestock. The fodder crisis is really bad right now because they can't go out to graze and they don't have cash to buy fodder. So I think, women as workers, which is what I'm trying to emphasize, I would like to just say one more thing, which they're very worried about, which is the children's education. Children are home, they've missed a lot of school. These are first generation learners. The families, the women have gone through great sacrifices to get them into schools. So now at this stage, they find that they're afraid that the children will go backwards. So I can go on. There's a lot more that the women are telling us, but I thought I'd stop here.
And thank you for sharing those experiences. I mean, there is a disproportionate burden on so many fronts, like worrying for the children, a threat to their economic security that they've worked so hard at building over the years. So clearly the burden is very high, and hopefully all the grassroots organizations will be able to work together to find some solutions to help them.
Yeah.
And we can make progress towards solving this. Renana ji, I'm conscious of the time. I did have a few more questions, but I'm conscious of the time. I know there are some questions that have come in from our audience. So I'm going to step into those questions. And I'm happy to note that some of them actually overlap with the questions that I had planned to ask. What advice would you give to young people looking to join the sector? I mean, given that they may be coming from very different academic training by different professions, but want to go, work in civil society organizations, what advice would you give to them? And what advice would you give to youngsters who, come in with a very urban lens? How do you solve for rural India without having that bias of urban lens?
Gandhiji had coined a very nice word. He said that there should be rural mindedness, which means that you don't necessarily live in the rural areas, or you may come from the urban areas, but if you have rural mindedness, your mind understands rural. What advice would I have for young people? Oh, I would say don't come in with preconceived notions. People come in from the academic field. You have so many different notions about what things should be like, what things are happening. I would say for quite a while before you do anything else, you should understand, listen and observe, and clear your mind of what your preconceived notion was. Then don't pre-plan any intervention. You think that this is what rural people need, let us rush in and do that. Don't do that. Go on demand, listen. If people say our main need is drinking water, you don't rush in and say that, no, your main need is to form self-help groups and take loans. You work towards drinking water. So listen to what it is that they want, and only then they will come with you. If they know you're addressing their real needs, then they will come with you. The other thing I would say is that we come with an education, and we are able to talk in the language of policymakers of people who are well off, of the corporates. We can be a bridge. We can take the reality of the poor, of the rural people, of the poor in the rural areas to policymakers. We can put it in a language which they can understand. And so I think I would say, listen, understand, react to demand, and be a bridge.
Definitely great advice for all of us, I think, irrespective of what our career paths are and what we choose to. Renana, another question that's come up is, just given your experience of working with Seva as it's scaled, what is the difference you see for organizations that are working in a few villages, and then what does it take to scale that movement across states, to take it much larger to a nationwide movement? Is it resources, time, support, and particularly in light of a movement centered around women? How do we scale this? You are on mute. Sorry.
Yes, I've unmuted. Sorry. I think it's a question one really grapples with. One of the reasons we have been able to scale is because we think like a union, and therefore you think along campaigns. And in a campaign, many people join in. So that way you can grow. So that's one thing. So for example, women as farmers. So women are farmers, we know they are farmers, but are they recognized as farmers? No, they're not. So for recognition of women as farmers and access to all the benefits that being a farmer brings, that can be a campaign, that is a campaign. And many women will join. And therefore you can scale up the number of people you're working with. So that's one. The other is, if you think about social enterprises, or what we call collective social enterprises, we find that they don't grow very big, but they can be replicated. So we have a Seva bank in Gujarat. In Madhya Pradesh, they saw the Seva bank, they said, let's start something similar. They started a cooperative. Similarly, 6 such cooperatives were started in different states. So this way, different replications can also take place. That's another way of scaling, by replication. Then the third way of scaling is for people to just come and understand what it is that is required to succeed. So in a very dry earlier, water is required, so you work on water. So people who come from other dry areas realize that this is one of the ways, so they learn from each other. So I think those are the 3 main ways we have found for scaling.
I think we have time for one more question. And again, I'm going to just club some threads from the questions and something that I also had. I guess you will agree with me that we've come some distance in empowering women over the last few decades as a country. But what remains to be done? What do you think are the top 3 challenges that remain, and what part can civil society play in this, and what part should policymakers play in this? Given your work on development and rights-based work, any words of advice for anyone listening in?
Well, I'll say the top 2 challenges that I can see. I can't think of the third one. So one is, women as workers are not really appreciated. Women as workers, women as farmers, women as entrepreneurs. They're not there is no appreciation that women are also workers. Women's health, yes, high appreciation. Women's education, yes, that's very important. But women's work, that is not considered a desirable goal even. And I think that's something, and that makes, what happens is then women can never rise. And especially for poorer women, I really like the formulation that there's a glass ceiling for women. But for poorer women, there's no glass ceiling, there is a sticky floor. You can't rise. If there's mechanization, you lose out. There's no technology for you. You do the most manual, most difficult work. Your earnings are very low. You don't get access to government subsidies. You don't get access to better markets. So, and the main reason for that is that women's work is not considered important. Women as mothers, women as educated, women, all that is important, but not women's work. And the second main thing, I think, which has not happened at all in India, which is one of the reasons for women's disempowerment, is the heavy burden of household work and work, earning work. And there is no move towards sharing of household work. So I think in India, more than many of the other countries, men find it shaming to share household work. And until the whole family shares the household work, the women will never be free. So I see those two as the major challenges for women's empowerment. What can policymakers and civil society organizations do? I would say the same thing for both, which is continuously highlight the fact that women are workers. We have very low numbers in the formal statistics, but that is because many of the women's work, like livestock, working with livestock, is not even counted. So keeping on highlight the importance of women's work, how do you make them off that sticky floor? How do you promote technology? I think that's one whole area. And the second area, I do think we should have a campaign on sharing of household work. We haven't had that, but I think it's time we do have it.
Thank you. Thank you, Renana ji. I mean, I'm sure given more time, I personally have lots more questions, and I'm sure the audience certainly would. But unfortunately, we are a little out of time. But thank you so much. A lot of things to think about for me personally, and I think safely say this for our audience, a lot to take home. Really, rural mindedness is going to stay with me for a while, and sticky floors for sure. So thank you so much for taking time out to share your experiences with us. John, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Renana, and thank you, Lakshmi. It was a wonderful discussion. There's a lot of engagement from the audience as well. On to the... Thank you, Renana.
Thank you.
Thank you.